Okay, continuing with Darwin, his view was the history of life is like branches on a tree. Okay, they represent the diversity of what's happening, what's going on, and so on. And that's how he kind of tried to set it up. He reasoned that if there was large gaps between related groups, because of branching out, then they ended up having extinctions because they got too far from basically where they started. Okay, so what he started to notice that humans have modified um, other species by selecting and breeding. Okay, so we have artificial selection, and this happens all the time. If you think about our breeds of cows, well, we want bigger cows with more meat on them so we can get more money. Um, we do it in dogs. We select for, if we've got certain breeds of dogs, we only want the fastest, the tallest, the whatever. So he noticed that we humans are modifying these traits, and they call that artificial selection. Because again, you have a choice of which dogs you breed together, unless of course you let them run free. Not a good idea. And then you're going to get characteristics passed on, but that isn't a natural selection. That's artificial because people are in charge of it. Okay. Um, there's certain things like from wild mustard, breeding brought us kale and Brussels sprouts. I mean, all these things were changed and basically came from wild mustard. So from wild mustard, we got kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and kohlrabi. You can't read that down there, but that's what it is. So again, we do it in plants all the time. Farmers they want breeds of grains that are more hardy, that don't get disease, that produce more wheat, whatever. So humans do kind of natural selection, but it's not naturally. We do it artificially. Okay. So another guy that influenced him was a guy by the name of Thomas Malthus. He saw that in human populations, we could increase food supplies and other resources again by artificial selection. Okay. He noticed some heritable traits are to your advantage. Okay. If you have, deer that run faster, probably are going to live longer because, they'll get away from predators faster, things like that. Okay. So it'll accumulate in population over time, and this is going to increase the frequency of individuals. So again, like I said, it was with deer, the faster deer, they're going to survive more. Pretty soon, the population of deer are going to be faster. Okay. And again, that's a process that explains the match between the organisms and their environment. Okay. If there's a change to adapt to the environment and it's to the good, then that organism, there's going to be more of them surviving, and you're going to have, pretty soon your whole population is going to have whatever their characteristic is. That's what Darwin says. Okay. So a summary of natural selection is individuals with certain heritable traits survive, and then they produce at a higher rate. Okay. And natural selection increases the match between organisms and their environment over time. So it's an adaptation to the environment to make sure they can get more food, that they can survive, extremes in temperature, things like that. Okay. If an environment changes over time, and we're seeing that right now because of climate change, natural selection sometimes can result in adaptations of that, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay. One example is I have some friends that live in Hawaii, and they've lost a lot of their bird species because birds in that area get diseases from mosquitoes, and the birds adapted to moving higher and higher and higher up, higher elevations, and the mosquitoes couldn't get there. They were above the frost line, they called it. Well, now the frost line's moved down, so the mosquitoes have moved up, and so now more and more birds are getting infected. And last time I heard, there was 22 species of birds in Hawaii that are on the endangered list because of, again, this adaptation. They haven't made the adaptation to the environment, and again, it's because it's getting warmer, so the frost line's moving down, so the mosquitoes are going higher. Okay. All right. Evolution is supported by, there's a lot of evidence for evolution. Okay. Especially in the fossil record. Okay. Sometimes there's new discoveries. There's gaps in the fossil record, and people are like, why are these gaps? Again, it's the theory of evolution. Sometimes theories are wrong. Okay. There are 4 types of data that Darwin used for his pattern of evolution. One was direct observations. Obviously, when he looked at all the finches in Galapagos, he had direct observations. One was homology, where they look at the backgrounds, the trees. The fossil record is a huge one. And then biogeography, sorry. Again, this is just mapping out, like homology is mapping out the trees, the evolutional branches, and then when you look at the geography, when you look at the geology of an area, what's going on there, what animals you have, what adaptations have they made, things like that. Okay, so 2 examples to provide evidence of natural selection. And again, natural selection wasn't a word that or natural selection was a word that Darwin used. He didn't use origin of species, okay? But natural selection in response to, here's induced plant species, okay? And there's 2. Here's a plant species, and then we'll look at a bacteria, okay? There's called soapberry bugs, and they use their beak to feed on seeds. And the feeding is most effective when the beak length is closely matched to the depth of the seed, okay, within the fruit. So in other words, if the seeds are kind of near the top, then they don't have a very long beak. If the seeds are way down into the fruit, then they have longer beaks. Okay? So the natural selection does not create these new traits, but edits them. Okay? So again, the ones that have the right length beak are going to get more food. They're going to make more babies. Those babies are going to have the longer beaks, and eventually the population is going to have longer beaks or shorter beaks or whatever they need. Okay? So the current local environment determines which traits will be selected. In other words, yeah, those are the ones that are better for them. And again, they're going to produce more offspring and so on. So when you're talking about homology, it said that's a similarity, again, resulting in common ancestry. So they have these trees, but where did they start? Okay. And we look at structures, anatomical resemblances. Okay. They represent variations in the structural theme of a common ancestor. So look at arms. This is your homology. Okay, we have the arm. Now, if you look at a cat, they have the same bones that we do, but obviously this part has been changed because of it's an adaptation. In a whale, they have the bones that we have, but look how short. You know, in your forearm, you have the ulna and the radius. Look how short they are in a whale. And these are their phalanges, their fingers. Okay, and here's a bat. Again, same bones, but modifications. So when you look at, the arms of all these, they've all been modified to their environment. Okay, so they call them tree thinking homologies. Evolution trees are, again, they're a hypothesis. Okay, they're looking at them and thinking there's a relationship somewhere between these different groups. Okay, so they form patterns in evolutionary trees. And again, that's what homology is looking at these patterns. Evolutionary trees can be made using different types of data. Now we have DNA to help. Okay, that's a big thing when you're sequencing the data. It used to be, we just look at them and say, okay, we have this modification here and here. But once we started, getting at this level, we can compare the DNA and see how close the DNA is. Okay, so the fossil record provides evidence of the extinction of species. We know we had a lot more species than we do now. And then it also shows the origin of new groups and how they change over time. And again, these are just in the fossil record. Okay, and then biogeography is the study of the area, the geographical distribution of species in an area. And again, it provides for evolution. Think of Darwin and his finches. Okay. They say at one time, all the continents in the earth were joined together, and that was called Pangea. And it's separated, it split into all the different continents, and it's since, because of continental drift, it's separated. So at one time, all the continents were together, so the fossil record looked similar. Okay, so if you understand how the continents moved apart, then that'll help you with a modern distribution of species, and it helps us predict where the groups evolved, where they came from, and so on. Again, it's just looking at, you have to use the fossil record as part of this, but again, you look at the distribution of species to figure that out. Okay, and then there's an endemic species. Some species are not found anywhere else in the world. They're just found in one particular location. And the Galapagos Island is those huge, well, they look like dinosaurs, but they're big lizards. Okay. The islands obviously are going to have endemic species because they can't get to other places. So they're right there. They're closely related to some species, but because they've been so isolated, they have their own characteristics. Okay. And Darwin said that's because They have colonized here, they've given rise to new species because they've had to adapt to their environment, and they don't have any new species coming in sharing genetics, sharing genetic information, or adapting. So that's why we've got species specifically. And again, you're going to find this mostly on very, very isolated places like islands. Okay, so what is the theoretical about Darwin's view of life? Okay, he said science, a theory accounts for many observations. He had pages and pages, and I think he was on that boat, the Beagle, for 5 years. He wrote down everything. He had pages and pages, and he had observations, he had data, and he tried to explain all this variety, this great, what happened, how did we get all these different things going on. His theory of evolution by natural selection, okay, he integrates a lot of different ideas in there. The diverse areas of biology, the geology, all that stuff. He put all that stuff into his theory. Okay, and there's also ongoing research to understand this evolution, because why do we have gaps in there? What happened? Was there no fossils put down during that time? So you got all kinds of information that's always going on about Darwin's theory. Okay, so that's it. Sorry I didn't do the bacteria one. I forgot to cut that one out because I wanted to make sure I got this done in 2. Okay, so anyway, we're done with chapter 22.